Hi everyone, welcome to Meshek Weissman. We were blessed this year, Baruch Hashem, with just shy of 6 tons of wheat. The rest of our fields we harvested for tachmitz, that's animal feed. And now we are taking our Terumot and Maasrot. So I figured it's a great opportunity to review the halachot of Terumot and Maasrot and what we're actually doing when we say the hafrasha. A lot of us have fruit trees at home and Eretz Yisrael, of course, and we say the hafrasha, but not everyone is zocheh to really know what they're saying. So let's do a really quick review of the different hafrashot and what we're doing when we say the hafrasha. So let's get into it. So the different hafrashot are, we start with Terumah Gedolah. Terumah Gedolah you give to a kohen, and it has to be kadosh. It is kadosh, and it has to be eaten the tahara, or it can be given to an animal that belongs to a kohen. It's asur for a non-kohen to get benefit from it. So it's very important that we deal with it properly. And the amount of Terumah Gedolah Deoraita from the Torah is anything. Any of this most minuscule amount is okay. Chazal gave the recommendation about how much it's supposed to be, but Bizman Hazeh, because no one is tahor, we don't go by that recommendation. We just give the minimal amount. The next step is Ma'aser Rishon, which is 10% of the total. So in our case, because we have 6 tons, 10% would be 600 kilos. So that 10% goes to the Levi. Now, Ma'aser Rishon is not kadosh, and it can be eaten betum'ah, and there's no problem with that. The next hafrasha that is done is Terumat Maaser, and that's what the Levi gives from his Maaser to the Kohen, and that is 10% of his 10%. So if I gave a Levi 600 kilos, so 10% of 600 kilos is 60 kilos. Another way of saying that is that it's 1%, or a me'it, of the total. So 1% of 6 tons is 60 kilos. The next step is either Ma'aser Sheni or Ma'aser Ani, and that depends on the year and the Shemitah cycle. Years 1 and 2 are Ma'aser Sheni, year 3 is Ma'aser Ani, 4 and 5 are Ma'aser Sheni, and year 6 is Ma'aser Ani. So this year we're in a Ma'aser Sheni year. We are in year 4. So we are going to separate Ma'aser Sheni, and then after you separate out the Ma'aser Sheni, you do a pidyon, and that's the kedusha of the Ma'aser Sheni gets transferred to a coin. In our case, we have a manui with Machon Torah ve'aretz, because this is a kind of a unique case in Eretz Yisrael, because most of the wheat is given to animals that's grown in Eretz Yisrael. They gave me a special nusach that I printed out that you'll hear it's a little bit different than what you're used to. Basically, we're going to be spreading out the pidyon of our Ma'aser Sheni, and they gave an actual monetary value to it among all of the coins at Machon Torah ve'aretz that they have for pidyon Ma'aser Sheni. So let's get into it. As we do the hafrasha, I will give an explanation of what I'm saying. Oh, before we get into that, I just want to show, down here are 2 bags. This is the wheat that we are separating out. And if you remember, we mentioned there are 2 hafrashot kedoshot. There is Terumah Gedolah and Terumat Maaser. Now together, they have to be a minimum of 1% plus a little bit, right? The little bit is the minimum for the Terumah Gedolah, and the 1% is the Terumat Maaser. So every time you do a hafrasha, you have to separate out, because it's the kadosh Terumot. Sorry, the kadosh hafrashot is just beyond 1%. And what makes up that 1%, that just beyond 1%, is the 1% for Terumat Maaser, and everything else that you separated out is Terumah Gedolah. So we have here about 90 kilos, which is about 1.5%. So that would mean that the 0.5% is for Terumat Maaser, and the 1% is for Terumah Gedolah. So let's get into it. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'afrish Terumot u'Maasrot, hame'it hanimtzet betachtit hasakim shel garinei achitim she'enachti b'tzad. That's these 2. And it's the 1% out of the 1.5%. Tishe'er b'intayim tevel. That 1%, which I'm going to use later, at a later stage for Terumat Maaser, is now staying tevel. I'm not affecting any change in that. Shar mashe ba'otam sakim she'enachti b'tzad, meaning the 0.5% roughly. Harehu Terumah Gedolah al hakol. I just made a Terumah Gedolah, and now it's kadosh. Hame'it she'izkarti, that me'it which we just made, that we left behind as tevel, that's going to become Terumat Maaser. Hame'it she'izkarti, ve'od tesha me'eyot b'tzad ha'elyon shel garinei achitim she'biratzoni letaken, meaning the 1% here, and another 9% b'tzad ha'elyon, it's the top of the pile. That is Harei Hen Ma'aser Rishon. we just made Ma'aser Rishon. So the 10% is made up of 1% from these bags and 9% from the tops of these bags. Hameit sheizkarti, the 1% that's in these bags, harehi trumat ma'aser. So now we just made all of these bags kadosh. We made the 0.5% from before Truma Gdola, and the rest of the 1% now into Trumat Maaser. Od asirit mea Tevel, b'tzad ha'tachton shel hachitim she'brotzoni letaken, harei hen Maaser Sheni. Now we just made the bottom 10% of the wheat into Maaser Sheni, and now we immediately have to do a pidyon. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher kideshara b'tzotav v'tzivanu lifdot Maaser Sheni. HaMaaser Sheni sheshavyo הוא 351 שקל, בתוספת רבע מערכו, שעולה לסך 438 שקל, הרי הוא מחולל על כל אחת מהמטבעות המיועדות לכך בבית האוצר של מכון תורה והארץ, כשעל כל אחת מהמטבעות יתחלל שווי של שקל אחד של פדיון מעשר שני. וזהו, and now we've completed the hafrashot, and now we can derive benefit from our grain. The only thing left to do is to figure out what to do with the trumot. When I say trumot, I mean the truma gdola and the trumat maaser. There are several options. You could either bury it. You can't spread it on the field because it could grow into new wheat next year once it rains, and that would be asur bahana. It's forbidden to derive any benefit from it. You can burn it if it gets wet, and then you'd be zoche in another mitzvah of doing bi'ur trumat me'ah, of destroying truma that became tameh. Or alternatively, you can give it to a kohen who has animals, and he can feed it to his animals, which is what I'm going to be trying to do. Thanks for paying attention.